He was 73 years old, bound in chains, facing the gallows built by a foreign army. But as they asked for his last words, he calmly recited, "To God we belong, and to Him we return. No fear, no regret, only faith." This is not just the story of a man, this is the story of a nation, of faith unshaken, of a teacher who became a general, of a lion who never ruled for power but for freedom. This podcast tells the story of Omar al Mukhtar, not just a man, but the soul of a nation, a Quran teacher who became the lion of the desert, and for 20 years defied one of Europe's strongest empires with faith, courage, and no intention to surrender. Stay with us and discover the legacy of a man who chose dignity over defeat. Omar al-Mukhtar was born in August 1858 in the desert town of Zanzur, near Tobruk in Cyrenaica. He lost his father as a child and grew up in poverty, raised by a local Sunusi sheikh. Even as a boy, Omar showed devotion and wisdom. He mastered the Quran and spent long hours in prayer. Omar's early reputation was not of a warrior, but as a wise arbiter. He was chosen by his tribe to settle disputes and was deeply familiar with tribal customs. By the 190s, he had become a sheikh, leader, within the Sunusi order, teaching and guiding his people through the Iraqi desert. By the time he reached his early 50s, Omar was a devout elder and a tribal leader. He had endured hardship and learned patience, living with barely 3 hours of sleep at night so he could worship and memorize the Quran. Little did Omar suspect that the coming years would force him to pick up arms and lead a far more dangerous struggle for his people. From the quiet sand dunes of his youth, his life was about to change dramatically. In 1911, when Omar was about 53 years old, Italy sought to seize Libya from the collapsing Ottoman Empire. Italian leaders, calling it a Roman Reconquista, bombarded and occupied coastal cities like Tripoli and Benghazi. The southern invasion was a shock. The Sunusi and Libyan tribes could not match Italy's modern army head on. Omar Mukhtar and other tribal leaders withdrew into the deserts of Cyrenaica, vowing to resist. For Omar, resisting was a moral imperative. He proclaimed that it was your God given right to resist such injustice, refusing to be conquered. Omar rapidly emerged as a leader of the resistance. Indeed, the pious sheikh took charge of irregular guerrilla bands. He organized attacks on Italian outposts and supply lines, using his knowledge of the desert to strike swiftly and melt away. These light armed guerrillas would skillfully attack outposts, ambush troops, and cut lines of supply and communication. Even against tanks, artillery, and air power, Omar's fighters, only a few thousand horsemen at most, harried the enemy relentlessly. One account notes his men fought more than 215 skirmishes a year against Italian forces. Meanwhile, the Italian response grew cruel. When Omar's attacks frustrated them, the fascist authorities relocated whole tribes into rural camps and fences were erected along the borders. Tens of thousands of Bedouin were packed into desert concentration camps, where many died of disease and starvation. Yet Omar remained undaunted. Even as villages were burned, he continued to preach unity and faith among his people. In time, his guerrilla campaign became legendary. The Italian army was astonished and embarrassed by his guerrilla tactics. By the end of World War I, Omar had transformed into a full-time war leader. He carried nothing but his faith and a rifle, rallying Libyan fighters with quiet courage. He would famously tell his followers, "We will never surrender. We win or we die." These words, or variations of them, became legendary in Libya. Under Umar Mukhtar's command, the resistance held on. He embodied the uncompromising spirit of his people. As the war dragged on and world powers changed sides, Umar's leadership only grew stronger. The fight was no longer a short war, but a decades long struggle. In the 1920s, Omar Mukhtar solidified his rule as supreme commander of the Senussi forces. After temporary lull, treaties signed 1917 to 1922, Italian operation intensified. By 1923, Omar was the de facto leader of all Libyan resistance, officially named commander of the Senussi military at war. He knew the desert like the back of his hand and adapted constantly. When the Italians sent troops into Cyrenaicas mountains, Omar shifted back to the coastal hills and ambush tactics. His band ranged across hundreds of miles, striking where least expected at night or riding swiftly after attacking an Italian convoy. Despite the ferocity of the conflict, Omar kept a strict moral discipline. He insisted his men abide by Islamic principles. For example, when one of Omar's soldiers sought to execute two captured Italian soldiers in revenge, Omar forbade it, saying, "We do not kill prisoners." When a comrade protested that the Italians killed Muslims, Omar replied, "They are not our teachers." His sense of justice earned him respect even from enemies. General Graziani, who oversaw Libya in 1913, admitted Omar was knowledgeable in religious matters, energetic and uncompromising, yet ultimately he remained very religious and poor. This description highlights Omar's personality, a devout scholar with a fiery will, indifferent to wealth or comfort. By now, Omar was nearly 70 years old, but he looked older, white-haired and solemn. Still, he rode with his men, prayed with them, and shared their hardships. Behind his gentle eyes lay steely determination. Under his guidance, even villages and tribes that previously ignored one another began to unite against a common foe. People rallied to the cause, inspired by his example. However, the 1930s brought a new Italian commander, General Graziani, determined to crush the last pockets of resistance. Graziani unleashed a brutal campaign, British-made tanks and poisoned wells, followed by what was effectively genocide. Entire regions depopulated and herded into camps. Water sources were poisoned, and half of Cyrenaicas' population was imprisoned. Omar's forces, now cut off from supplies and allies, fought on under desperate conditions. Yet Omar Mukhtar's message never faltered. "I will not leave this place until I achieve martyrdom or victory." His calm persistence kept hope alive even as the desert grew lean and the hunters closed in. Against this backdrop of crushing warfare, Omar's fate was sealed. The scene was set for his final trial. In September 1931, Omar Mukhtar's nearly 20-year-long guerrilla campaign came to a tragic climax. While leading a raid at Wadi Butaga near Suluk, he was hit in the leg and forced to surrender. He was captured by Italian colonial troops on September 11, 1931. The news spread quickly. Libya's foremost resistance leader was a prisoner. The Italians held a show trial for him in Benghazi. Omar showed no fear. On September 16, 1931, at the age of 73, Omar Mukhtar was executed by hanging in the Suluk concentration camp before a crowd of onlookers. As his execution approached, he recited the Islamic prayer, "To God we belong, and to Him we return." According to witness, even at the final moment, he stood calmly, uttered no threats, only faith. That hanging was meant to break the resistance as well, but instead, Omar became a martyr. 12,000 prisoners and Libyan notables had been forced to watch. His death shocked and galvanized Libyans. If Omar could meet death calmly for his faith and freedom, others felt inspired to continue the cause. Even General Graziani, who had tried to destroy him, acknowledged Omar's grandeur. The Lion of the Desert had died a hero's death, still believing in the justice of his struggle. Omar al-Mukhtar may have walked out of this world by an executioner's rope, but he remains alive in history and legend. He stands as an everlasting reminder. A poor desert scholar could stand up to the mightiest empire, refusing to bow except in death. His life teaches that, even in the darkest night of oppression, hope can survive in a single steadfast heart, and through that hope, a people may ultimately find freedom.